A curtain stirs with no wind, yet hides a secret darker than silence. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axon. Tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Your voices bring this journey alive. I can't wait to read them. Now let's begin the mystery. I have a fondness for little domestic omens, the kind you can blame on plumbing and forget over coffee. The brownstone has its share. The front bell gets an extra rasp when the caller is either selling dictionaries or trouble. The kitchen window, if you open it an inch in March, whistles like a mournful piccolo and drives Fritz to mutiny. And there's a spot on the office carpet, exactly 3 paces from Wolfe's chair, where my shoes squeak only when the conversation turns to money. So when a curtain moved in our office at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday, moved on its own, with the windows latched and the radiator unenthusiastic, I filed it under omens for later review. I was at my desk with the day's mail, spooning bills from their envelopes, when the heavy cream drape to the south of Wolfe's chair gave a small, definite ripple. Not a sag. Not gravity catching up with cotton. A ripple, quick and neat, as if someone behind it had changed their mind. I looked. There was no one behind it. If there had been, Wolfe would have had apoplexy, and the chair would have ejected him on principle. He was where he belonged, planted in yellow leather like a general in a map room, the afternoon bottle of beer in its sleeve and his fingers making a tidy steeple. He had been listening to me summarize an inquiry from a lady who wanted to know whether her husband's sudden interest in Esperanto was cultural or criminal. I had voted for neither. His eyes slid to the curtain, then to me. He did not sigh. For Wolfe, that was interest. "Draft," I said. "No," he said, and took a short pull from the glass. "Vectors. You've been reading the weather reports again." "I read nothing again," he said. "You are welcome to open the window and discover the absence of a draft. Do not, because you will complain about the temperature, and I will complain about you." I stayed put. The drape had settled. If it had been a mouse with aspirations, Fritz would have heard the resume update from the kitchen and arrived with a skillet. Everything in the room looked proper. The desk with the mail, the wall safe, the massive globe that was more furniture than geography, the row of books, the orchids murmuring to themselves upstairs through floorboards and routine. The brownstone was as it should be, which is to say, it was arranged specifically so the world would happen elsewhere. The bell rasped. "Trouble," I said. "Your taxonomy is primitive," Wolfe told me. I went to answer it. The woman on the stoop wasn't selling dictionaries. She had the sort of face that shows up in society columns as a study in restraint. Cool, pale, perfectly ordered, and the sort of posture that tells you she learned to stand still under lights. She carried a portfolio flat against her ribs and wore a slate dress designed by someone who didn't tolerate crumbs. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "I'm sorry to come without an appointment. Mr. Wolfe will see me. My name is Linnea Vale." There are names that come with footnotes. Linnea Vales said she was the city's reigning patron of small theaters and new plays. A woman who could find $5,000 for a playwright if the playwright could also find a second act. She had a reputation for taste and a hobby of enemies. "Mr. Wolfe doesn't accept on credit," I said, and stepped back to let her in. "But he may accept you." "Office this way." She didn't gawk. Most people take at least a glance up at the stairs and try to imagine the orchid rooms where bliss is measured in humidity and Latin. She kept her attention on the portfolio and the path of the rug, and arrived at Wolfe's door with her face adjusted to neutral. She stopped exactly on the carpet's squeak spot. It obliged. "Miss Vale," I announced. Wolfe nodded once, which is his version of rolling out a red carpet, and pointed her to the red chair. She sat. The portfolio she placed on her knees like a lapdog that might bite. "You're in need," Wolfe said. "Explain briefly." She looked at me, then back to him. Briefly may be hard. she said, but I'll try. Something is wrong at the Lyric Street Playhouse. I'm underwriting a premiere there in 10 days. The director insists the play is ready. The playwright insists the director is sabotaging him. The actors insist on new contracts. Those are ordinary wrongs. The wrong I can't file under ordinary is the curtain. Wolfe's eyelids dipped. Ah, the main drape, she said. It moved during a rehearsal. There was no draft. The house was closed. Only 5 of us were present. It moved as though someone were behind it. No one was. The stage manager swears it has happened 3 times. I glanced at our south drape. It stayed retired. You want an exterminator, I offered. I want a mind that isn't attached to the playhouse, she said. We have carpenters, electricians, carpenters' cousins who are electricians, and one very nervous playwright. I need an outsider. She tipped the portfolio open and drew out a folded plan. Stage, wings, fly tower, the works, and a set of photographs on glossy paper. I also need discretion. There is money at stake. There is reputation. And there is the fact that someone is watching us. Watching, Wolfe said. Why is that a fact? Because after the curtain moved yesterday, she said, a single paperclip that had been on the prompt desk was standing upright, balanced on its narrow end. The stage manager says it wasn't a trick. It's a message Wolfe's mouth did not smile, which for him is a laugh in church. A paperclip is not a message, Miss Vale. A paperclip is an object. The meaning is imported by the receiver. Still, he set the beer down. You saw this yourself? I did, she said, and I've been receiving other messages. Anonymous envelopes with photographs of the playhouse taken from odd angles. No threats, just images. One was an extreme close-up of the hem of the main curtain. Another was the door to the lighting booth. Another was the lock on the prop cabinet. I brought them. She spread the photos on the edge of Wolfe's desk. He didn't lean forward. I did. The shots were crisp, the kind your dentist would approve. The hem of the curtain showed stitches like tiny marches. The lighting booth door had a fresh scuff above the handle. The prop cabinet lock bore a faint discoloration that could have been oil or sweat or a conscience. Who took these? I asked. I don't know, she said. They arrive in the morning mail. No return address. No prints. Hard to do, prints, I said. People keep their fingers on them. I wiped them, she said, after I realized the police would be the next step if you refused me. Pooh, Wolfe said, and it was affectionate. Miss Vale, you have said nothing yet about why you have come to me and not to the police. The curtain does not violate the penal code. The paperclip, however menacing, has not yet brandished a weapon. She folded her hands over the portfolio. Because the brownstone is sacred, she said simply. Because when this city wants something handled quietly and correctly, it comes here, pays a fee, and doesn't read about it in the Post. Because if I bring in the police, the premiere dies of gossip before it opens, and because I was told you could tell me whether I'm being toyed with, or robbed, or warned. By whom? Wolfe asked. She hesitated just long enough to count. By a man who has your orchids named after him. Or perhaps it's the other way around. Mr. Wolfe, Mr. Bernard Heverley, is a friend. He asked me not to involve his name unless you refused me. He spoke highly. There are names with footnotes, and there are names with entire bibliographies. Bernard Heverley had money where other people had spleens, and a decade ago had sold a textile concern for a number so large you had to stand back to see the commas. He collected 2 things, early French comedies and bad habits. Wolfe had once consulted on a matter for him that involved neither, unless you counted a misunderstanding about a tapestry as both. Wolfe looked at the photographs without touching them. The room settled around his silence. Upstairs, the orchids continued to be perfect. The curtain did not move. I waited. You told Mr. Haverley, Wolfe said, about the curtain and the photographs. I did, she said. He said, go to Wolfe. He knows about curtains. Indeed, Wolfe murmured. He placed his fingertips together, a cathedral for a beetle. Miss Vale, your theatre is a mechanism. So is your play, your company, your reputation. So is this house. When a mechanism behaves irregularly, one does not moralize. One finds the operator. Mr. Goodwin, present, I said. You will go to the Lyric Street Playhouse, Wolfe said. You will observe the curtain. You will observe the booth door, the prop cabinet, the prompt desk, and the people who stand near those objects with their hearts beating too fast. You will bring me the condition of the stage's air, temperature and movement, and the precise arrangement of lines along the fly rail. That's a lot of air for a Tuesday, I said. Breathe sparingly, he advised. To Miss Vale, my fee is substantial. You will pay a retainer now, in cash. If you object, you may remove to another practitioner who interprets paperclips. She didn't blink. From the portfolio came bills that would have made the squeak spot sing. I counted. Wolfe didn't watch me do it. He was looking at the south drape again, as if waiting to see whether it had another opinion. One more thing, he said, when the retainer was settled and Miss Vale had her receipt. You will make no adjustments at the playhouse. Do not fix anything. Do not change schedules, bars, or bolts. The presence of order is often the best bait for a meddler. I can promise that for 24 hours, she said. After that, the director will mutiny. Then we will be done in 24, Wolfe said. She rose. On her way to the door, she paused at the south curtain, the one that had misbehaved, and frowned at it with the professional respect of a woman who sponsors illusions but dislikes uninvited ones. Do you suppose, she asked me lightly, that they speak to each other? Curtains, I said. They gossip about drafts. She smiled a small, rehearsed smile and left us to our air. When the door shut and her footsteps faded, Wolfe spoke without looking at me. Archie. Sir, bring me the photograph of the hem. He waited until I put it in his hand. Look. I looked. The stitches were neat. The hem was true. The faintest of pale marks crossed two threads like a drawn breath. Wax, Wolfe said. Plain white beeswax, a smear we have not earned. Someone understands fabric. Go and find me a mind that makes messages from things as you like, I said. The curtain, of course, didn't move. That would have been too eager, but as I went for my hat, the south drape lifted a fraction, no more than a sigh, and fell back, innocent. I looked at Wolfe. He lifted an eyebrow. Vectors, he said again, and reached for the bell pull to tell Fritz he'd accept beer at 5 minutes past the hour, not on it. I went out to find a theatre where the air had opinions. The Lyric Street Playhouse looked like a brick that had taught itself manners. It had a new coat of paint and an old habit of drafts, the kind of place where a row of seats can impersonate an audience, even when empty. I checked in with a woman at a metal desk who had the stage manager's permanent expression, a stoic ledger balancing hope and catastrophe. She introduced herself as B. March and took my card as if it might bite. Her pencil lived behind her ear and looked disappointed in everyone. You're the neutral party, she said. Good. We've got too much partisan oxygen. I'm here to test the air, I said, among other things. Curtain first. She led me into the house. The main drape was a plush cardinal red that took itself seriously. It hung full and heavy from the fly rail like royalty posing for coins. We stood 10 rows back while Bea put her hands on her hips and scowled at it like a parent daring a toddler to try something twice. It didn't move. I took the aisle to the orchestra pit, climbed over a coil of cable, and went up the steps to the stage. The boards had been sanded recently and oiled earlier. They gave me that polite, seasoned give that makes you feel you should apologize for walking. I crouched at the drape's hem. The stitches were tidy, the line was true, and there, on the inside fold, a whisper of chalky pale, exactly what Wolfe had seen in the photo. I rubbed a fingertip and got the faint smear of beeswax for my trouble. Bee watched me from center. "Find a ghost?" she asked. "Only one that knows its textiles," I said. "Who works the flies?" "Me and two over hire," she said. "Manny when he's sober, Jules when he's not offended. Nobody gets to the rail without me." "Which one is offended more?" "Jules," she said. "He's a purist. We're doing a premiere with modern bits, and he thinks modern bits should be done by modern minds. That excludes everyone he knows. And the director." "Galen Page," Bee said, with a neat arrangement of disdain. "Genius with actors, allergic to screws. He thinks if the set were lighter, we could move it with feeling." "The playwright?" "Benton Quill," she said. "Wears sleeves like he's hiding revised pages in them. Believes sabotage is the only way to explain timing. Any other luminaries?" "Our leading lady is Renata Vale. No relation to Linnea, and very particular about the distinction. Leading man Lysander Cole, which is a stage name because he was born Gary Pelt, and that won't sell balcony seats. And Mr. Dacey from lighting, who knows what everyone did because he sees it from above and keeps his mouth shut for sport." I asked to see the booth door. The scuff above the handle was fresh enough to blush. Inside, the booth smelled like hot dust and schedules. A stack of cue sheets perched in a tray with a ruler on top as if they required discipline. I put a hand out into the light spilled from the glass. The air was warm and indifferent. The small domestic fans used to clear heat from the dimmers were off. No mechanical breeze was on duty to goose a curtain. I filed that under tomorrow's argument. The prop cabinet lived stage right. Its lock had the kind of tarnish that collects fingerprints by reputation. I asked Bee for the key. She produced it with the reluctance of a person who knows responsibility is contagious. Inside was an inventory of modern life pretending to be symbolic. A brass letter opener shaped like a dagger, a silver cigarette case no one would be allowed to use, 6 envelopes addressed by a props intern who had learned calligraphy from movie posters, a glass paperweight that held a bubble like a trapped thought. I bent close. The letter opener's blade showed a thin crescent of wax near its tip. "Don't look at me," Bee said. "We don't wax props." "Maybe the props wax themselves," I said. "It's the fashion." I asked her to close the cabinet and not open it again until I said so, which earned me the squint that stage managers give to people who think the world will follow rules. We walked the wings. The drape's operating line hung in a perfect vertical by the fly rail. Sandbags neat, cleats properly hitched. No frayed fibers, no telltale dust arcs on the floor where a rope had swung habitually. I pulled a slip of paper from my pocket and licked a corner. My own unsanitary anemometer. I held it at the edge of the drape. It didn't flutter. Then I set the paper down on the stage and watched for the tiny shiver that says there's convection coming off lights, warming air unevenly. I got a tremor and a shrug. Enough movement to keep a curtain honest, not enough to teach it mischief. Bee's radio gave a small cough. A voice that sounded like it had been practicing irony said, "House at 5. Galen wants a stumble through whether the stumble wants us. And Mr. Quill has changed page 30 again if anyone needs something to resent." Bee clicked back. "We'll resent it on the hour. Archie Goodwin here in the house. Play nice." We had just enough time for introductions before the rehearsal began. On stage, Galen Page was tall and dry, a man built of lines. He shook my hand with the kind of grip that suggests hands are political. Benton Quill did a quick pulse check on the pile of revised pages at his chest and nodded as if I might have stolen one by looking. Renata Vale entered on a diagonal that had been rehearsed all her life. Even in rehearsal flats, she landed on her light. Lysander Cole delivered his name with capital letters and kept talking with them. I gave the same speech I give to people who think detectives come with sirens. I was there to observe, not interfere. The less they performed for me, the sooner I would be gone. Galen approved me with a boyish grin that didn't reach his eyes. They ran the scene with the curtain. In the play's architecture, the drape masked a change from domestic argument to public exposure. It drew when a line was crossed, a tidy metaphor that made the playwright happy and the director smug. I parked myself at the downstage corner and watched the hem. The air off the house lights warmed my cheek. The paper on the deck didn't stir. The line operator, B for this run, kept her hand off the rope until the cue. Renata sported a look that would have killed at 20 paces. Lysander did a reasonable imitation of a conscience failing to pretend. The cue arrived. B hauled. The curtain obeyed exactly, and only then. No ripple, no sigh, no independent thought. Again, Galen called, and they did. And again, the drape behaved like a well-paid employee. While they were resetting, I slipped to the prompt desk. A single paperclip stood upright, dead center on its thin end, balanced as advertised, with more care than sense. I bent to eye level. There was a thin crescent of, yes, wax along one side, just enough to give it a tack on the wood. B leaned in beside me. "Tell me it's physics," she said. "It's physics," I said. "And someone who wants applause for 8th grade chemistry." "Not 8th grade," she muttered. "8th circle." When they broke, I made the rounds. Dacey, the lighting man, had the quiet confidence of a person who knows where every screw is and who loosened which. Jules at the fly rail had a purist's contempt for compromise and a nicotine gum habit. His eyes skated past me to the ropes and back like he didn't like leaving them unchaperoned. Manny had knuckles like door hardware and the dazed politeness of a man on his second chance. Renata was cordial and careful. Her glance flicked to B's radio each time it chirped and then away, as if the sound carried a secret only she could choose to ignore. Lysander asked if detectives ever consult on character. I told him no, but we audited truth. Benton Quill cornered me on stage and hissed, "You saw it, didn't you?" "It moved yesterday. It wants us to fail." "Plays don't want," I said. "People do." He worked his mouth around that and didn't like the fit. I walked the house alone, one last pass. Up at the rear, under the mezzanine lip, I found the kind of angle a camera would love. A sight line that clipped the stage into strips and left the drape a red plane with gravity for a frame. If I were composing anonymous photographs of locks and hems, I'd choose this perch and wait for the light to do what I told it. On the carpet beside the seat was a small flake of candle wax, pale as breath. I pocketed it and headed back. B met me at the wing with a face that said schedules had multiplied in my absence. She also had a message. "Linnea called," she said. "She wanted your report before blackout, and Mr. Haverley asked whether the brownstone had suggested any vectors." "Tell Mr. Haverley Wolfe suggested patience," I said. "Tell Miss Vale the curtain is a citizen in good standing until proved otherwise. And tell your prop master to count how many envelopes we keep in that cabinet and how many we think we keep." "Why?" B asked. "Because someone who sends pictures from the cheap seats will sooner or later send a note from up close," I said. "And if a note arrives that shouldn't exist, we'll want to know how it learned its lines." On my way out, I stopped in the lobby where the glass doors trapped a whisper of evening. The posters for the premiere stood in a neat rank, all red and white, and promise. I checked the bottom edges. A smear of pale wax lived at the corner of one frame, a fingerprint in absentia. Back at the brownstone an hour later, I gave Wolfe his wax fleck, his air report, and a patient sentence-by-sentence tour of everyone's pulse. He listened, with his eyes closed and his thumb resting on his forefinger, which is the posture he reserves for the kind of puzzle where the pieces insist on being furniture first. When I'd finished, he opened his eyes long enough to move them to the south curtain, It kept its decorum. "Good," he said. "Tomorrow you will return and bring me the play." "The script?" I asked. "The play," he said, and his mouth shaped something that might have been satisfaction or appetite. "What these people think it is, and what it is in fact. Between those two curtains, Mr. Goodwin, someone is moving." The next morning started with Fritz moving through the brownstone like a man whose eggs were a matter of world peace. Wolfe was upstairs with the orchids, which meant I had 20 minutes before he descended and turned breakfast into a seminar on restraint. I used the time to review my notes from the playhouse, particularly the wax traces. Wolfe had asked for the play, not the script, which was his way of telling me the words didn't matter. Only the people did. Still, I made a copy of Quill's newest pages in case Wolfe wanted the object to sneer at. When Wolfe came down, I gave him my report again, trimmed and polished for his ears. He listened with eyes half shut, lips forming an invisible commentary I'd never be invited to read. When I'd finished, he only said, "Return." So I did. By noon, I was back at the Lyric Street Playhouse, where rehearsal had been delayed by a dispute over whether the leading man could smoke on stage with an unlit cigarette. Lysander Cole insisted it was essential to the character. Renata Vale insisted it was essential to the audience's lungs that he didn't. Galen Page refereed like a priest at a duel, praying both combatants would die of dignity. Benton Quill hovered with his script like a gambler, hoping the dice would forgive him. I sat in the house and let them circle. Actors in argument are better than actors in costume. They reveal their priorities without the cover of lines. Lysander played to the room, not to Renata, which told me his need for attention outweighed his devotion to character. Renata held her body like a contract clause, rigid and non-negotiable. Quill avoided eye contact with either of them, but kept darting glances toward the drape, as if it might weigh in. Between rounds, I climbed back to the mezzanine. The wax fleck I'd found yesterday was gone, either swept up or collected by the hand that placed it. On the rail where a camera might steady itself, a faint scrape remained, recent and purposeful. Whoever had been taking photographs hadn't quit. They'd only tidied up. From that perch I could see the entire stage picture. The drape, the wings, the cabinet, the booth. Whoever worked from here had the vantage of both audience and intruder. B. March joined me, carrying her radio like it was welded on. "They're making me earn my pension," she said. "Any joy from your detective gods?" "They're mute," I said. "But they like wax." She frowned. "We had a candle in props 2 days ago, ceremonial bit that Quill decided was symbolic. It disappeared overnight. I assumed a stage and borrowed it for romance. Now I'm thinking they borrowed it for chemistry. Who had the key then? Me. But Jules has lock picks and no shame, and Manny would open the cabinet if you told him there was a sandwich inside." We went back down. Jules was on the rail chewing gum like it owed him money, eyes on the ropes. Manny was below, coiling cable with the attention of a man trying not to break it. Both men glanced at me once, then dismissed me. Suspicion sat on them differently. Jules like a jacket, Manny like a burden. Wolfe would say both fit. The rehearsal lurched forward. Renata flung a line across the stage with surgical elegance, and the drape moved when told, nothing more. During the reset, Quill cornered me again. His eyes were feverish, his voice quick. "You see it, don't you? Someone wants me ruined. Galen cuts my pages, Renata mocks my stage directions, Jules mutters about purity, and Linnea pretends to be my patron, but she keeps bringing in outsiders. She's afraid the play is better than she can manage." "You have enemies," I said. "Congratulations. That means you're writing I have saboteurs," he hissed. "Someone is using the curtain to break me." I left him stewing and took another lap. At the prompt desk, the paperclip was gone, leaving a faint wax stain. On the prop table, the brass letter opener had shifted angle, its tip pointing not forward but sideways, as if it had been picked up and placed again. These weren't mistakes. They were nudges, like fingers drumming on a coffin lid, waiting for someone to notice. Back at the brownstone that evening, I spread the whole performance in Wolfe's office. He sat in his chair with lips compressed, hands tented, eyes hooded. I gave him the vanished wax, the cleaned perch, the missing candle, the restless playwright, the actor's duel, the stagehand's glances. I finished with the letter opener turned askew. Wolfe didn't move. Then he said, "Sabotage thrives where vanity breeds. We have a fertile house." "Which vanity?" I asked. "All," he said. "But one in particular arranges wax." "Who?" I asked. "Patience," he told me. "Return again tomorrow. Collect not what they say, but what they fail to guard. That will give us the operator I knew better than to press." I poured him beer and let silence do its work. Upstairs, the orchids thrived on humidity and Wolfe's attention. Downstairs, the brownstone south drape hung perfectly still, as though daring me to blink first. The next morning, I took my time getting to the playhouse. Wolfe hadn't hurried me, and when Wolfe doesn't hurry, there's a reason. He wanted the place unsettled before I arrived, actors and crew gnawing at each other, the curtain sitting like a red witness that refused to testify. He knew the more they stewed, the more they'd slip. So I let them. By the time I walked into the lobby, the air already had the tang of frayed tempers. B. March was on the phone near the box office desk, her tone somewhere between triage nurse and executioner. She finished with a snap, then spotted me. "We've had another visitation," she said. "Come see." She marched me straight to the stage. The house lights were up, harsh and flat, making every scuff look like vandalism. She pointed to the prompt desk. A fresh envelope lay there, plain cream with no markings, scented like a gift. B's lips were thin enough to slice bread. "It wasn't here when I locked up last night," she said. "I was the last out. This morning, first thing, there it was." I pulled on a handkerchief and picked it up. Inside was a single glossy print, this one of the curtain taken from ground level, almost from the floor, so close that the camera caught the weave of the fabric. Nothing else. No note, no threat, no explanation. Just obsessive detail. I held it up for B. "How many of these now?" "5, maybe 6. Miss Vale has the others. She didn't mention this latest, so either it came just for us or she hasn't seen her mail yet." "Locks show anything?" "Nothing," she said grimly. "Not a scratch." That made me glance at Jules, who was up on the rail chewing gum like it was a personal protest. He saw me looking and bared his teeth in what might have been a grin. Manny was off left, lugging flats, careful not to make eye contact. Dacey in the booth was invisible, but had his ears tuned, I could tell. The actors hadn't arrived yet, which meant the envelope had been planted in quiet hours. I slipped the photograph back in its envelope and pocketed it. No one touches this desk until I say otherwise. B's brows went up. "Detective's orders?" "Common sense," I said. "Somebody's using wax to anchor toys and a camera to make memories. They'll get bolder if they think no one's watching." She didn't like it, but she nodded. "Fine." "Then you'd better watch them," the rehearsal stumbled into motion. Galen Page was in one of his saintly moods, preaching about pace and rhythm while ignoring the fact that the leading lady and man had declared private wars. Renata Vale swept past Lysander Cole without a look, which made him inflate like a punctured tire searching for air. Quill hovered again, desperate for recognition, every cut line like a bleeding finger. They played their parts badly, each one radiating the sort of tension you could strike a match on. I sat in the house, recording movements rather than words. Wolfe had been clear, not what they said, but what they failed to guard. Renata guarded everything, her bag, her script, even her water glass. She kept it near, eyes flicking to it between lines. Lysander guarded nothing. He scattered his pages, let his coat flop over the armrest, even tossed his lighter on the stage apron as though daring someone to pocket it. Galen guarded his authority, which meant he never let go of the director's stool even when he wasn't using it. Quill guarded his resentment, which was harder to misplace. At break, I wandered the wings. The prop cabinet stood closed, but I checked the lock anyway. A faint smear of wax glistened on the latch itself, not the blade this time. A fresh one. I bent down. The smell was faint but unmistakable. Beeswax warmed by hand. Someone had handled it this morning. I made a mental note and closed it again before anyone noticed. The break ended with Galen insisting they try the curtain scene once more. I stationed myself near the downstage corner, close enough to hear the fabric breathe if it had lungs. Bee took the line. On the cue she pulled, smooth and steady. The curtain drew aside. For half a second, just before it settled, I caught the faintest ripple at the hem, unnatural, like a tug from below. I crouched, quick. Nothing. The floor was bare. No wires, no thread, no trap. But I had seen it. The actors finished the scene oblivious. Bee gave me a questioning look from the rail. I didn't answer. Better to keep it in my pocket with the envelope. Evidence belongs in sequence, not in gossip. When rehearsal finally broke for lunch, I took my chance. I asked Lysander, all charm and restlessness, to give me a word. He grinned like a man invited to audition again. "What can I do for you, Mr. Detective?" "Tell me why you keep leaving your lighter around." He blinked, then laughed. Part of the role. "My character is careless. Thought I'd try it in life too. Does your character also dabble in wax?" That made him frown, just briefly, before he shook his head. "I dabble in applause, Mr. Goodwin. Wax is for candles and saints." Renata brushed past just then, murmuring something to Bee, and didn't look at us. But I saw her hand slip into her bag and close tight, as though securing something inside. She met my eyes with a flicker of defiance, then was gone. I left them to it and stepped outside for air. The street was cold and ordinary, traffic indifferent, but I couldn't shake the sense that the playhouse had its own weather system, a climate engineered by someone who enjoyed tension as much as applause. I lit a cigarette and thought about the wax, the envelopes, the ripple. Someone inside wanted everyone off balance. Wolfe had said patience. But patience doesn't mean inaction. It means the right action at the right time. When I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair, hands steepled, eyes shut. I gave him the envelope, the fresh smear on the cabinet, the ripple I'd seen. He opened his eyes only long enough to study the photograph, then closed them again. "The curtain moved because someone wished it to," he said. "Not by hand, not by draft. By arrangement." "Arrangement how?" I asked. "Later. We require the motive before the mechanism. Watch tomorrow. Do not ask what they say. Ask what they hide." He folded his hands tighter. Upstairs, the orchids hummed in their humidity, content. The south curtain in our office stayed perfectly still, as though mocking the one-up town, and Wolfe, immovable as always, waited for the play to betray itself. By the following afternoon, the playhouse had become less a rehearsal space and more a pressure cooker with velvet trim. The actors were fighting in whispers, the stagehands in shrugs, and the curtain in silence. Wolfe hadn't given me new orders, only a reminder. Attend to their omissions. Which meant I wasn't just a witness. I was bait, even if nobody but Wolfe and I knew it. Bee March greeted me at the stage door with a look that said she had stopped sleeping in favor of glaring. "We had another envelope," she said flatly, "on the prop table this time. Same cream paper, same nothing written on it. Quill found it. He's working himself into a froth." "Where is it?" She handed it over. Inside was another photograph, this one a close-up of the lock on the cabinet. The angle was intimate, as though the photographer wanted to whisper a secret about brass. No notes, no threats, just that obsessive, mute scrutiny. I slid it back into its sleeve. Quill came barreling downstage as if summoned by the mention of his name. His face was shiny with sweat, his hands trembling around his script. "You see? You see," he sputtered. "Someone is mocking me, tormenting me. They know I can't work with these constant intrusions." "You're working fine," Galen Page called from across the house, his voice dry. "Your paranoia is improving by the day." That sent Quill into a fresh fit. He clutched the envelope to his chest like it was Exhibit A and hissed, "They want my word strangled." "They want me silenced." Renata Vale appeared from the wings, immaculate as ever, and gave a dismissive laugh. "Oh, Benton. If anyone wanted you silenced, they'd do it with scissors, not stationery." Lysander Cole found that hilarious and slapped his thigh with theatrical gusto. Quill flushed crimson, shook his head, and stormed off towards the green room. I made a mental note of the path his hands traced over the envelope. Caressing, possessive. If he wasn't the sender, he was close enough to envy whoever was. I let the rehearsal roll forward. This time I stationed myself at the booth with Daisy, the silent sentinel. He wore headphones, his eyes on the stage, but his attention on me, I was sure. "Busy house," I remarked. He gave a half smile, but no words. When B called a break, he finally lifted one ear cup and said, "Curtain doesn't move on its own. Somebody's pulling strings." Then he put the cup back and retreated into sound. It was the first opinion he'd given me, and it had the weight of a man who watched everything without moving. At the prop table, while the actors argued about blocking, I noticed the brass letter opener again. It had shifted angle once more, now pointing toward the wings as though it had been placed deliberately to draw the eye. Wax residue was faint on its edge, nearly invisible unless you crouched, which I did. B caught me at it. "You think it's them again?" "I think someone's staging a play inside your play," I told her, "and they're rehearsing better than you know." She muttered something unprintable about playwrights and stalked off to herd her crew. I pocketed a fleck of wax scraped from the blade, careful to keep it for Wolfe. After rehearsal, I trailed Renata Vale. She left the stage briskly, head high, bag clutched tight. Outside in the chill, she flagged a cab. When she bent to step in, her bag tipped just enough for me to glimpse a stub of candle nestled among her cosmetics, pale wax crumbling at the edge. She snapped it shut fast, but not before I'd seen enough. She caught me watching, her eyes cool, then disappeared into the cab without a word. I didn't follow. Wolfe would want the fact, not the chase. Back at the brownstone, I delivered the report. The new photograph, Quill's hysteria, Daisy's comment, the angle of the opener, Renata's candle. Wolfe listened in silence, then closed his eyes and pressed his fingertips together. When he finally spoke, it was in that tone of satisfaction he saves for puzzles nearing their frame. "Not Renata," he said. "Her vanity is too overt. She guards because she fears theft, not because she steals. Someone planted that candle, or placed it where she could not resist possessing it." "So Quill?" I asked. "Quill thrives on paranoia. It feeds him. Too much, and he would collapse. Too little, and he would accuse. Number. The operator requires detachment, a hand steady enough to apply wax where others see only cloth." "Daisy?" I suggested. "Perhaps. Or Jules? Or someone who plays both sides of the stage. What matters is not the wax itself, but the intention. A curtain that moves without draft is a metaphor. Someone is staging menace, Archie, to corrode. Confidence. The play is secondary. The sabotage is primary." "Sabotage for what?" I asked. "That," Wolfe said, "is what you will bring me tomorrow. Watch for what they fail to protect. Their omissions, Archie. Always their omissions. I left him to his beer and stared at the south curtain in our office. It hung heavy, still loyal to gravity alone. But I couldn't shake the memory of the ripple I'd seen, faint and purposeful. At the Lyric Street Playhouse, someone was speaking in wax and fabric, and if Wolfe was right, the language was only going to get louder. By the 6th day, the playhouse had grown used to me, or maybe they had just stopped pretending not to notice. Either way, when I stepped inside, B. March didn't bother with greetings. She jabbed her pencil toward the stage. "You'd better see this." The curtain was already down, waiting like a closed eyelid. At the hem, near center, a scrap of paper had been tucked into the fold. Not dropped, tucked. B hadn't touched it. She stood back with her arms crossed, her radio muttering softly at her hip. I bent, careful, and eased it out. A torn piece of script page, Quill's handwriting scrawled across it in thick pencil. A single line, "The world will not wait." It looked like a fragment ripped from rehearsal notes, not the finished draft, but the wax smudge on the corner was fresh and deliberate. Someone had pressed it in place like a seal. B's mouth was grim. "That was not here when I closed up last night." "Which means it arrived after," I said. "Either someone has a key to this house, or someone is already inside before you lock." She didn't deny it. Her eyes flicked to the booth, to the wings, to the rafters, as though every shadow was auditioning. "I don't like it," she muttered. Neither did I. The envelope photographs had been unnerving, but this was escalation, direct intrusion into the curtain itself, a signature. Whoever was behind it wanted recognition, not just observation. The cast filtered in soon after, one by one. Renata Vale looked immaculate, but I caught her eyes narrowing at the hem, a flash of irritation she smoothed over before anyone else noticed. Lysander Cole bounded in, laughing too loudly, dropping his coat on a chair. Quill trailed behind, hollow-eyed, like a man waiting for proof of his own persecution. And Galen Page, the director, came last, looking bone-tired but sharp, scanning faces as if staging another scene. When B showed them the scrap, the reactions varied. Quill clutched his chest and announced, "You see, they're quoting me now. They want my own words turned against me." Renata rolled her eyes. Lysander made a show of checking his pockets, muttering something about fan mail. Galen only stared at the wax smudge, his mouth pressed in a line. "Stage business," he said finally. "That's all this is. Someone in this company is bored enough to invent ghosts, or angry enough," I said. He glanced at me, faint irritation under his composure. "And which do you suspect, Mr. Goodwin?" "Depends on what they've failed to guard," I told him, which earned me nothing but a faint sneer. The rehearsal limped forward. The actors stumbled through the scene with the curtain again, lines sharp as glass. I kept close to the wings, watching hands, eyes, small gestures. Jules was on the rail, chewing gum with militant rhythm. Manny hauled scenery, his bulk moving in apologetic arcs. Daisy kept silent in the booth, all-seeing, unflinching. It was the same play I'd been watching all week, but the tension was worse. Every time the curtain swayed slightly from movement on stage, heads jerked as though expecting another omen. At break, I shadowed Quill. He'd collapsed into a chair off stage, muttering to himself, pages clutched like holy writ. I leaned on the wall beside him. "You lose a note." He looked up sharply. "What?" "The scrap in the hem. Your line." His face went ashen, then defensive. "Those are my private drafts. No one should have them. Maybe you left them out." "Never." He shot up, eyes wild. "Someone stole them. Someone wants to humiliate me. Don't you see? They're dismantling me piece by piece." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe someone's using you as camouflage." He blinked, uncomprehending, then shook his head furiously and stalked off. I let him go. If Wolfe was right, Quill's hysteria was convenient noise, cover for someone with steadier hands. Later, while the others argued blocking, I checked the booth. Daisy sat quiet, gaze steady on the stage. On the desk beside him lay a roll of waxed twine, ordinary stage gear used for tying cables. But there, in the dust beside it, a pale smear of wax that wasn't from twine at all, softer, beeswax-like. He caught me looking and raised an eyebrow. "Problem?" "Depends," I said. "You always keep props in your booth." "It's not mine," he said calmly. "Somebody left it." His tone didn't change, but his eyes stayed on me a second too long. When rehearsal ended, I stayed behind. The house emptied slowly, actors muttering, bee-herding stragglers. The curtain loomed, still and heavy. I walked the aisles once more. Up in the mezzanine, where I'd found wax before, a faint trace gleamed again near the rail. Someone had returned. Someone who liked the vantage, who wanted permanence in their little theater of sabotage. By the time I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair with the evening beer. I gave him the torn scrap, the reactions, Daisy's booth, the wax. He took the page between his fingers, studied the smudge, and set it down. "Good," he murmured. "Now we have confirmation." "Of what?" I asked. "That this is not mischief, Archie. This is sabotage with a purpose. A play ruined before its premiere costs more than money. It costs reputation. Miss Vale's reputation, perhaps Mr. Haverley's. Someone intends her humiliation, not Quill's. Then all this wax business is theater, designed to corrode trust. A curtain that moves alone is an actor itself, suggesting forces unseen. Very clever, he steepled his fingers. But cleverness requires a director. Tomorrow you will bait them. You will let them think their stagecraft has persuaded you. And then, Archie, you will watch who relaxes. He closed his eyes. I sat back, watching the south curtain of our office, still loyal to its silence. At the Lyric Street Playhouse, the fabric was speaking in wax and words, and Wolfe was listening to every syllable. The next morning, I arrived at the Playhouse earlier than usual, not because Wolfe had ordered it, but because I wanted to see the place wake up before the cast and crew started stamping their anxieties into the floorboards. The house was dim, dust motes drifting in the shafts of light that had wriggled past the blackout curtains. B-March was already there, hair pinned tighter than her patience, clipboard under one arm. She gave me a look like I was the complication she hadn't scheduled for. "No fresh envelopes today," she said, "unless they've learned to hide." "That would spoil the show," I told her. "They want applause." I made a circuit of the stage on my own. The curtain hung without a tremor. The hem was clean, no tucked scraps or wax, but when I circled to the prop table, I found the brass letter opener again shifted, this time angled toward the audience instead of the wings. A deliberate placement, subtle, but enough to rattle anyone paying attention. I bent, ran my finger along the edge, and caught the faint tack of wax. Not fresh, but not old either. I left it and stationed myself in the house. Wolfe had told me to bait them, to act persuaded by their phantom curtain, so I made sure I looked suspicious, watchful, nervous even. I let my eyes linger on shadows, let my jaw tighten when the curtain swayed from footsteps, and nodded to myself as if confirming some secret dread. If the saboteur was watching, they'd think they'd hooked me. The actors filed in with their usual baggage. Renata Vale was brisk, her bag clutched close. Lysander Cole breezed in behind her, laughing with the careless abandon of a man who thought charm could substitute for talent. Quill entered last, gaunt, clutching his pages as though the margins themselves were enemies. Galen Page drifted in midway, calm but sharp, scanning the stage with the eye of someone who wanted absolute control and knew he didn't have it. Rehearsal began poorly and went downhill. Renata and Lysander couldn't agree on where to stand. Galen tried to arbitrate, which only made them sharper. Quill muttered at every change of timing. B's radio squawked with scene-shifting requests. Through it all, I played my part, scribbling notes with exaggerated gravity, glancing at the IE curtain with the intensity of a man sure it would betray him again. Halfway through, the drape gave the smallest ripple at the hem, so slight B might have missed it. I didn't. I jumped, cursed under my breath, and made a show of stalking down the aisle as though to catch a culprit. The cast froze, all eyes following me. "What is it?" Galen asked, exasperated. "The curtain moved," I snapped, loud enough for the rafters. "Don't tell me it's drafts." "There are no drafts here." The words hung in the air. Quill gasped, his hands trembling. Renata looked annoyed, Lysander amused. Galen's face tightened, then smoothed into disdain, but it was Jules, up on the fly rail, whose eyes flickered too quickly away. I stored that for Wolfe. I crouched at the hem, peering, brushing the fabric as if I expected to find a handprint. Nothing. But the actors whispered among themselves now, voices uneasy. My bait had worked. Whoever had staged the ripple would feel they'd succeeded in unnerving me, in infecting the group with suspicion. At the break, I lingered by the prop cabinet. B unlocked it to fetch a stage letter for Renata. Inside, everything was in its place except the envelopes. Instead of 6, there were 5. I counted twice, then looked at B. "We're missing one," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "I catalogued them yesterday." "Then someone catalogued them again," I told her. Renata took her envelope without comment, but her eyes darted to the others before the cabinet closed. Lysander leaned over her shoulder, too close, and smirked. Quill hovered a few feet away, twitching like he wanted to demand a recount. Galen ignored the cabinet entirely, as if refusing to acknowledge the intrusion gave him control. When rehearsal ended, I didn't leave immediately. I wandered up to the mezzanine, past the rows of empty seats, and found a fresh wax smear near the same railing where I'd seen one before. Whoever was documenting their sabotage liked this vantage too much to abandon it. I crouched, examined the scrape, then slipped a fragment into my pocket for Wolfe. Back at the brownstone, I laid it all out. The bait, the ripple, the missing envelope, the wax at the mezzanine. Wolfe listened with eyes half closed, his lips pursed as though tasting bitterness. When I finished, he opened them and spoke without preamble. Quill is noise. Renata is pride. Lysander is vanity. Galen is control. Jules is resentment. Manny is distraction. Daisy is silence. Each quality is combustible, but only one hand applies wax with consistency. "Jules," I said. He flinched today. "Just for a second, perhaps," Wolfe murmured. Or perhaps that was too easy. "We must consider the operator's purpose. Not mischief, ruin. Who benefits from a premiere destroyed? Not Quill. His ruin would end his career, not Renata or Lysander. They feed on audience. Galen might salvage reputation by declaring genius thwarted. But sabotage, from above, yes, from a vantage, suggests detachment. Someone who observes, who records, who orchestrates with precision the booth, I said. Daisy. Perhaps, Wolfe said again. He leaned forward slightly, his bulk shifting like a continent. Tomorrow, Archie, you will force them into collision. Contrive a moment when all suspects must guard what they believe is theirs. The operator will betray himself, not by words, but by what he fails to protect. I nodded, though I didn't relish the job. Poking tempers in a theater already full of sparks was like juggling lit matches in a barn. Still, Wolfe had set the stage. All I had to do was light it. The south curtain in our office hung still, unbothered by drafts or sabotage. But I could almost hear the echo of the playhouse's ripple, faint and deliberate, a language spoken in fabric. Wolfe was ready to translate. All he needed was the final line, and I had the feeling it was coming soon. The next day I walked into the playhouse with Wolfe's instructions still burning in my ears. Create collision, make them guard their treasures, and watch who fails. It wasn't my first time running interference for Wolfe, but this was a trickier stage than usual. Everyone here was already circling with daggers in their eyes. I only had to nudge them to draw blood. B. March handed me a report before I even shrugged off my coat. "Another envelope," she said tightly. This one wasn't hidden. It was on the director's stool. I opened it with my handkerchief. Inside was a photograph of the stool itself, from the exact angle at which Galen usually sat. The kind of shot that says, "I see you even when you don't see me." I tucked it away and asked where Galen was. "In the office," B. muttered. "Trying to pretend the building isn't cursed?" The cast trickled in shortly after, tempers already on edge. Renata Vale carried her bag closer than ever, lips pressed into a fine line. Lysander Cole sauntered in late, dropped his scarf across 2 seats as if reserving them for his ego, and winked at the stagehands. Quill arrived haggard, clutching a stack of new pages, muttering about sabotage and theft. Galen followed, brisk but brittle, snapping orders before the actors even found their marks. I waited until they were halfway into a scene before setting Wolfe's plan in motion. I strolled casually to the prop cabinet and asked B, loud enough for all to hear, if she'd kindly open it. She hesitated but complied, handing me the key. Inside, the 6 envelopes sat in their tidy row again. The missing one from yesterday had reappeared. "Interesting," I said, projecting my voice. "Yesterday there were 5. Today, 6 again." The line hit like a stone dropped in a pond. Quill lunged forward, eyes feverish. "You see? They're tormenting me, putting them back and forth like a cat with a mouse." Renata stepped closer, too, but her eyes weren't on Quill. They were locked on her own envelope, as if daring anyone to touch it. Lysander leaned in and laughed, careless, but his hand brushed the envelopes before he pulled it back. Galen snapped at him to behave, his voice too sharp for the moment. B closed the cabinet with a snap, muttering about wasting rehearsal time. But I had seen what Wolfe wanted. Each of them revealed what they guarded. Quill guarded his sense of persecution, Renata her property, Lysander his attention, Galen his authority. B guarded the order of the house itself, and in the booth above, Dacey didn't stir at all, though his line of sight never wavered from us. That detachment carried weight. Rehearsal stumbled on, but the tension only grew. When the curtain was finally cued, I took my post near the hem. B pulled the line. For an instant, just before the drape moved, I saw the faintest shimmer again, as though a finger had flicked it from the mezzanine rail. I looked up sharply, but the seats were empty. Still, my skin prickled with certainty. Someone had been there seconds before. At break, I engineered the second collision. I claimed I'd found a scrap of wax near the letter opener. True enough, and held it up like evidence. "Who's been tampering with props?" I asked loudly. Lysander laughed. "If I wanted wax, I'd comb my hair with it." Renata's eyes narrowed. Perhaps the stagehands find amusement where others work. Jules barked from the rail. "Don't drag me into your melodrama. I've got ropes, not toys." Quill, predictably, exploded. "It's sabotage. They're destroying my words, one prop at a time." The noise rose like a storm. Each tried to shield themselves, to throw suspicion elsewhere. But one face stayed calm. Dacey's in the booth, silent as a judge. When the day finally ended, I left the playhouse with more weight in my pockets than when I entered. The new envelope, another fleck of wax from the opener, and the image of Dacey's composure etched in my mind. Back at the brownstone, I laid it out for Wolfe. He didn't move while I spoke. When I finished, he opened his eyes and gave one of those slow nods that means he's reached the hinge of a case. The operator is not Quill. His panic is useful cover. Not Renata, whose pride would never risk exposure. Not Lysander, whose vanity is too careless for precision. Galen. He shook his head. Control is his obsession, but sabotage would mean loss of control. B is discipline incarnate. Too direct. No, Archie. This is orchestration from above. Detached, measured. Wax, photographs, subtle intrusions, all require patience and perspective. Daisy, I said. Yes, Wolfe replied, the silent man in the booth. He sees all, speaks little, moves less. The curtain is his instrument. He has made it an actor, a conspirator. Tomorrow, Archie, you will invite Miss Vale and Mr. Heverley to attend rehearsal. And then you will contrive to unmask our director of sabotage in front of his unwitting cast. He leaned back, satisfied, fingers steepled like cathedral arches. Upstairs, the orchids basked in their steam, perfect and silent. In the office, the south curtain hung still, but I could almost feel it ripple with anticipation. The playhouse's ghost was nearly ready to step into the light, and Wolfe, as always, was already waiting in his chair to conduct the reveal. When I told Miss Vale that Wolfe required her presence at the next rehearsal, she didn't argue. She arrived at the playhouse sharp as a glass, her slate dress immaculate, her portfolio clasped like a shield. Bernard Haverley came with her, portly and urbane, carrying an air of amused detachment that didn't reach his eyes. They took seats in the house without ceremony, though the cast felt their presence like an extra row of spotlights. Wolfe had sent me with one instruction: contrive collision, let the operator reveal himself. I wasn't sure how much contriving I could do, but in a room where paranoia had already taken root, I didn't need to add much water. Rehearsal began stiffly. Galen Page doubled his authority in front of the patrons, barking orders with extra sting. Renata Vale performed as if the ghosts of a dozen critics were scribbling behind her. Lysander overcompensated, hurling lines to the back wall like he was auditioning for a Shakespeare festival. Quill trembled with every cut, muttering about betrayal. Jules chewed his gum like gunfire. Manny slouched through his duties, and Daisy observed from the booth, silent, impassive, a figure carved from the shadows. At the first break, I played my hand. I announced to the room, casual as possible, that another wax trace had been found on the curtain hem. Every head turned. Renata tightened her grip on her bag. Quill flinched. Galen cursed under his breath. Jules spat gum into a cup with exaggerated contempt, but my eyes went upward. Daisy hadn't moved, not even a tilt of the head. Stillness can be louder than panic, and his silence had started to ring. To stir the pot further, I asked B to open the prop cabinet again in front of everyone. The envelopes sat in their neat row, 6 once more. But this time, as B reached to close it, one slipped forward, dangling precariously on the edge of the shelf. A hush fell. I stepped closer and saw the telltale sheen of wax on its back, a faint tack that had held it until I asked for the reveal. Someone wanted drama, a little gasp in front of Miss Vale and Haverley. The cast bristled. Renata snapped at Quill for inviting curses into the production. Quill shouted that the ghosts were his tormentors alone. Lysander laughed too loud, masking nerves. Galen slammed the cabinet shut and declared that if anyone tampered with props again, they'd answer to him. From the corner of my eye, I caught Daisy's gaze at last. Not fear, not guilt, calculation. The kind of look a chess player gives when someone is 3 moves from discovering the trap. I filed it for Wolfe. The rehearsal staggered on. During the curtain scene, I took my post again by the hem. B pulled the line. As it shifted, there came not a ripple this time, but a jerk, a sharp, deliberate tug from nowhere. The fabric shivered through its length, and even Miss Vale gasped. The actors broke character, staring. Galen swore, Renata clutched her bag tighter, and Quill declared the theatre cursed. Jules hollered from the rail that it wasn't him. All eyes swung upward, but Dacey was already on his feet in the booth, calm, moving to the light board as though adjusting a cue. Too calm, too measured. I shouted up, "Sit tight." No cues needed. He froze, one hand hovering just above the dimmer levers, then slowly stepped back. The silence in the house was as taut as wire. Miss Vale rose. "This is intolerable," she said, her voice clear and sharp. "If this continues, we cancel the premiere. I will not have my reputation dragged through shadows." Haverly shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. His eyes were on me, weighing whether Wolfe's envoy could resolve what the police would turn into scandal. I nodded once, then addressed the company. "We're done pretending this is drafts or superstition. Someone here is staging sabotage. It ends now." The cast erupted. Accusations, protests, defenses. Renata pointed at Quill. Quill raved at Galen. Jules shouted down Lysander. The din rose like a storm. Through it all, Dacey stayed silent, still, as though waiting for the moment Wolfe had predicted. The collision where everyone guards their own and the true operator forgets to disguise himself. I let it boil a minute longer, then stepped between them and raised my voice. "Enough. Mr. Wolfe will have all of you at the Brownstone tomorrow evening. Bring nothing, hide nothing. He will tell you which one of you has been writing in wax and curtains. If you think you can out-talk him, I suggest you try. If not, save your breath." The words landed like a gavel. No one liked them, but no one dared object. Miss Vale gathered her portfolio, her face pale but resolute. Haverly gave a short nod, as though satisfied he'd bought the right ticket. The actors simmered in silence. Jules muttered and went back to his ropes. Dacey sat down again in the booth, unreadable. I escorted Vale and Haverly out, then lingered to watch the curtain one last time. It hung perfectly still, innocent as cloth. But I'd seen it jerk, seen the wax, seen the photographs. And Wolfe, with nothing but my words, would see the rest. Back at the Brownstone, I reported every detail. Wolfe listened without interruption, eyes closed, fingers steepled. When I finished, he exhaled slowly and opened his eyes. "Good. Tomorrow, Archie. The play will close in this office, not on stage. The curtain will have its final cue." He rang for Fritz, who appeared with the evening's beer, and settled deeper into his chair. The south curtain, in our office, hung motionless, loyal to silence. But I could feel it then. The pause before the reveal, the hush before Wolfe summoned his cast for the last act. The Lyric Street Playhouse had thought it was haunted. Tomorrow they would learn it had only been directed. By the time the cast and their patrons filed into the office at the Brownstone the following evening, Wolfe had arranged the stage more carefully than Galen Page ever could. His chair was his throne, his desk the proscenium, and the red leather chairs set in a semicircle before him, the audience pit. Fritz had been instructed to offer no refreshments. Wolfe wanted nerves dry, not dulled. I ushered them in one by one, noting how they carried themselves into the lion's den. Miss Vale entered first, portfolio tight against her ribs, lips thin but resolute. Haverly lumbered in behind, urbane but restless, his eyes darting over Wolfe's office as if to measure whether intellect really could be bottled in books and orchids. Renata Vale glided in, bag clasped tight as ever, posture regal and defensive. Lysander Cole followed with his smile like stage paint, bright but cracking at the edges. Quill scurried in with his pages, pale and trembling, muttering to himself as though rehearsing a confession. Galen Page strode in last of the principals, all calm authority forced into brittle composure. Jules stomped in chewing gum as though it was everyone's throat. Manny came behind, subdued, arms folded like a wall. Dacey was last, quiet, his eyes unreadable, his body still as the curtain he had commanded. B slipped in at the back, pencil at the ready, though she had no notes to take. Wolfe regarded them with half-lidded eyes. The silence stretched, heavy, until Quill broke it with a nervous cough. Wolfe lifted one hand, and the room fell quiet again. "You have brought into Miss Vale's house of performance a vandalism of intention," he said, his voice precise, resonant. "A curtain disturbed without cause, wax upon props and locks, anonymous photographs, and scraps of script tucked like omens. Each of you has seen, felt, or feared this mischief. You have all, in turn, suspected one another." Pfui! He leaned back. "Sabotage thrives on vanity and fare, but it requires patience, precision, and detachment. That narrows our circle." Renata bristled. "If you imply—" "I do not imply," Wolfe interrupted. "I state. Miss Vale, your pride is voracious but visible. You clutch your bag as if it contained the Grail, yet you are incapable of subtle tampering. Mr. Cole." He swung his eyes to Lysander, who sat up straighter. "Your vanity makes you careless. You cannot keep your hands from touching, but you have not the discipline for repetition." Mr. Quill gasped, clutching his pages tighter. Wolfe's tone did not soften. "Your paranoia is inexhaustible, but it is your prison, not your weapon. You are too loud to be subtle." "Mr. Page," the director's jaw tightened, but Wolfe did not pause. "Control obsesses you. You would sooner rewrite the world than leave marks of wax on a curtain. Number, you are not our operator." Mr. Jules the Flyman spat gum into a scrap of paper. "I told him it ain't me," he growled. "And I concur," Wolfe said. "You resent, but you do not orchestrate. Mr. Manny, you lack the will. Miss March, you are discipline itself. You would no sooner unbalance a stage than your own breath." The room shifted. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Which leaves us with the man who observes, who records, who sits aloft in his booth and sees all." Mr. Dacey, the lighting man, didn't flinch. His eyes were steady, calm. "You think I care about wax?" he asked softly. "I do not think," Wolfe said. "I know. The curtain is your instrument. You made it an accomplice, giving it the illusion of life. You took photographs from your vantage, waxed paperclips upright, affixed scraps of script, moved props by fractions. Not to amuse yourself, but to corrode confidence. To rattle Miss Vale, to make her believe her premiere cursed, to drive her to cancel. Sabotage not of art, but of reputation," Miss Vale gasped. "But why?" Wolfe's gaze did not shift from Dacey. "Because you, Miss Vale, dismissed him. Months ago, you refused his petition for a directing slot in one of your smaller theaters. He sought to prove your judgment faulty, to collapse your grand premiere before it could open, and thus to have his revenge." Haverly grunted. "Good God." Renata's hand flew to her mouth. Quill stammered something incoherent. Galen exhaled sharply, as if relieved the finger was not pointed at him. I stepped forward. The wax scraps, the vantage in the mezzanine, the calm every time panic spread. He fit it all, Wolfe. Dacey remained seated, but his eyes hardened. "And you think you can prove this? A smear of wax, a ripple in cloth. The police won't waste their time." "They will," Wolfe said softly. "When Miss Vale produces the envelopes, the photographs, and the prop altered with wax. They will when Mr. Goodwin testifies to the vantage wax flecks in your booth. They will when your silence becomes evidence itself. You built a theater of menace, Mr. Dacey, but you forgot the law demands an audience. You will have one." The room erupted. Renata muttering prayers, Lysander swearing, Quill babbling triumph, Jules cursing satisfaction. B stared, pencil frozen. Miss Vale sat stiff, portfolio trembling. Haverly nodded once, satisfied. I stepped to the phone and called Inspector Kramer. By the time I hung up, Dacey had folded his arms, expression resigned as if the curtain had finally fallen on his private play. When the room cleared and silence returned, Wolfe leaned back, closing his eyes. "Sabotage," he said, "is a confession of impotence. To ruin another's stage is to admit one cannot build one's own." Fouai. He rang for Fritz, who entered with the dinner tray. Wolfe reached for his fork. I sat back at my desk, shaking my head. All this over waxen curtains. Wolfe opened his eyes long enough to spear me with a glance. All this, Archie, over vanity. Always vanity. The brownstone returned to its steady rhythm, beer at the right minute, orchids above, silence where it belonged. The curtain in our office hung still, dignified, as though it had never moved at all. The brownstone had a habit of absorbing the noise of cases after they ended. By the time Fritz set down the coffee and disappeared back to his kitchen, it was as if the playhouse had never happened, as if the wax and the ripples and the panicked actors had been nothing more than a draft through a curtain. Wolfe sat back with his eyes closed, savoring the meal as though the world beyond his walls had been set right through butter and tarragon alone. I'd seen the police take Dacey away, his calm face finally cracking when Kramer explained how impersonating ghosts with wax wasn't just petty sabotage, but malicious interference in a commercial production with contracts and money behind it. Quill had nearly fainted with vindication. Renata had stormed off in offended relief. Lysander had offered me a handshake I didn't take, and Galen Page had muttered something about order restored. Miss Vale, pale but steady, had thanked Wolfe in tones too precise to be casual. Haverley had merely grunted approval, his kind of payment. Now the orchids hummed above us. The office lamp made its familiar pool of yellow, and Wolfe lifted his brows at me. "Archie," he said, "you see now the futility of performance without substance." Mr. Dacey sought revenge by constructing illusions. He succeeded only in confirming his impotence. "Maybe so," I said, "but he gave us one hell of a show. Wax, rippling curtains, vanishing scraps. It wasn't Broadway, but it sold tickets. Pfui, a play requires purpose. Sabotage requires only spite. The first may endure, the second rots at once." He sipped his coffee. "Miss Vale will recover. Her premiere will proceed. The actors will devour their egos anew. Nothing changes, except for one lighting man who traded a booth for a cell," I said. Wolfe grunted. "That is not change. That is correction, silent, stretched, warm and familiar." Outside, the city fretted on, but in the brownstone the curtain hung perfectly still. The case had closed, the stage returned to its rightful players, and Wolfe was content to retreat into his orchids and his dinners. I leaned back in my chair, watching him with the kind of admiration a man will never admit out loud. "Well," I said, "at least now we know what makes a curtain move when it shouldn't." Wolfe's eyes half opened, glinting with the satisfaction of a man who had been right from the start. "Not what, Archie?" "Who?" And that was his final word on the matter. The brownstone held its silence once more, the orchids breathed above, and dinner was served. The curtain, obedient at last, never moved alone again.